Okay, I will. Oh,
Okay, everybody, welcome back. We're back on another episode of Grandma's Podcast. We're back again. On the road again. Changed a few things. Grandma's going to show us some stuff. She found some really cool stuff. Let me show you guys here on the camera. Give me just a minute. I guess we'll start off with this.
it's a, that's a meat grinder.
You can tell me a little about it, Grandma.
Okay.
Um, yeah, this thing's pretty cool. So this is a meat grinder. Now, what year is this from?
I'm thinking that I was born in 1940, and that was already in great functioning capacity. So
Wow,
I'm guessing it was probably in the 30s when they first got married, and
it's in really good shape.
yeah,
So
it's
you
in.
guys can't see inside. Let me see if I can get this angle. Inside, like the meat goes through there, and you just do the handle.
You clamp that onto the side of a little edge of a table.
Right, with a little vice grip, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just put your meat in it.
And it grinds it up either finely or a little bit coarser, whatever. There are little plates that are interchangeable that fit in the front of the
Yeah.
place where the meat comes
Oh,
out.
yeah, these things.
That's another one of the sizes of the meat that you can
So
make
you
it.
can put it on the end.
Yeah.
And the one you have on
Uh
the
huh.
end now, it comes out in bigger slots, and you can put
Makes
this
it
on.
very.
It's super old. I mean, look at this stuff, and it's also got this one.
That makes it coarser.
And of course, type of meat. And then, what do you suppose this one was for?
That's either coarser still.
Yeah, wow. And this box, let me show you guys this box. Look at the logo on this box. Combination meat and food chopper from the 1930s.
I'm sure it is, yes,
Yeah.
because it was very functional all the time I was a young child.
And you put this in this box, and she got it out and assembled it all for the podcast today.
Yes.
It's honestly in really good shape.
It all fits in that
Yeah,
box.
it's really nice. And then why don't you tell us about these? We got some checks here from the Bank of Maysville,
Mm-hmm.
established in 1835. That's pretty cool. I'll go ahead and put these in front of the camera.
Yeah.
Wow. So tell me about these checks. So what were these checks for?
It tells on the bottom of the check what each one was the purchasing cost for, and one was for a harrow, and I see on there is spelled Harril. My grandpa bought part of the investment, and part of it was for a plow, and it was like $37.50, whatever. And then there was a place down further where my dad had bought half the interest in a tractor,
I see that. Yeah.
and it was $150 for his portion of it,
Wow.
and that was the farm and that's how much it cost, $300 evidently at that time.
Yeah, that's amazing. So,
And as
so here we have the date 1942.
uh-huh.
Sorry if you guys can't hear me. 1942, $150, and then right there, half an interest in the tractor. And then who's signing that at the bottom? B.V. Emmons. That's
Byron Vice Emmons is my dad's name.
wow.
B.V. Emmons, uh-huh.
1942. And look at that. They have some type of little stamper that puts little holes in it that says it's paid.
It's paid. It made holes in the
And what is
check.
this?
That's because my dad was a mason,
Oh, he's a mason.
and he did not really stay active when I was a young child at home, but he was a very honored person, and that was his status in the masonry. And there's another piece of metal under there that was another indication of what he did. Are there two there, or is it dropped off?
I have it right here.
Oh, that's okay. I think that's the same kind of thing.
So this is Grand. Oh yeah, it's a Grand Lodge of Kentucky.
Yeah.
Check this out real quick. I don't know what this is. Grand Lodge. Go ahead and pause that if you need to. Grand Lodge of Kentucky.
Uh-huh.
I'll read it. 132nd Annual Communication, Louisville, Kentucky, October 18th to 20th, 1932.
There you go.
1932.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the other side of the coin.
You know, I have to figure out when my mom and dad were actually married, so he wasn't terribly active after that.
Wow. George Washington. It's George Washington on here. It's a coin from 1932. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I looked it up. $37 in 1942 is worth $700 today.
Ooh, I know it was quite a big jump in the value of things
Right.
in the current.
So I mean, those payments are $700.
Yeah.
We're basically looking at $700
Think about it.
payments. Let's check out some of these
Some
other
pretty
checks.
interesting. And I referred to the first farm that I could tell you that I lived at, called the Pfizer Farm.
Yeah.
And you'll see one of the checks there made out to Sam Pfizer. And that was one of my relatives.
Sam Pfizer.
Uh-huh.
What was the relation?
He was like my grandmother's brother.
Now I see on the picture here. Is that what the Bank of Maysville looked like?
Yes, that was the picture of, and you could look at it today and find it on Google, and the bank would look like that. I'm confident.
Wow. That's
Yeah, that
amazing.
was it. And then my papa, my mom's dad, was the other joint person who paid part of the farm cost, and his was like 900 or something like that, and then later he paid a little bit more somehow.
Yeah.
But that was the famous story of how he sold his part of the farm like overnight, and it caused my dad to need to move because it was not possible for him to afford that all by himself.
It's kind of messed up, yeah.
And
These are big checks.
oh yeah,
$1,250.
yeah, it was a lot. When we moved to Ohio, the cost of it was like 55 acres was 5,000, and that was about 7 years later. So anyway, that was an indication of what the cost of a farm was in those days.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking this up real quick. That's let's see. Inflation calculator. Let me look this up real quick, and I'll tell you how much $1,250 in the year. See how far back I can go. It was 1944, I think you did that. 1944, yeah. So that was $1,250. Let's see. So that's the equivalent of $22,000 in today's money.
I know it was a lot of money for them at the time,
Yeah.
so it was
That's a lot. So
equivalent.
900.
And I put the checks all in sequential order so that you could tell that the ones that followed were
Oh, I see.
different years.
Yeah, so these are to a Mr. Jordan or a Mrs. Jordan. Who's this?
C.D. Jordan was my
Yeah.
grandpa, my papa.
CD. What does that stand for again?
Charles Dudley
Charles Dudley
Jordan.
Jordan.
And I take it back. Sam Pfizer was a relative of my grandmother. Did I say that? Anyway,
Okay.
it was
That's
the
how he was
German
related.
side. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
got it. Okay.
Pfizer
These
family.
checks are just amazing. I mean, just thinking that they're in such good condition too.
Yeah, they
1949.
are.
That's amazing.
I was glad I could flatten them out and keep them
protected, yeah.
protected
This
like
is
that.
great. And then we have Bank of Russellville. That's
Oh, and now that's when
that's really cool.
we moved to Ohio
That's a
and
lot of money.
they paid for the farm in Ohio.
That's double. So you're looking at
Yeah,
like 50 grand in today's money.
yeah.
Wow. The Bank of Russellville.
So that was,
1950.
yeah.
Man.
I was 10 years old,
Huh.
and I was able to retract and tell what years I lived at what farm because of these checks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
That makes
I could
sense.
tell. Uh-huh.
Wow.
And after we left the oh, go ahead if you need to show the other
No, no.
things.
You tell your
Okay.
story.
This is interesting about the sale of tobacco that was on this next thing and shows a basket is a big stacked up bundle of tobacco after the harvest, and all the tobacco was allowed to kind of wilt down, and then we would pick off the leaves and put them into what's called hands and compress it, and it was sold in a basket in the different warehouses.
Wow.
And as a matter of interest, I have tracked down the fact that some of the warehouses have actually been burned because they evidently found out that tobacco was not good for health, and I don't know whether it was a accidental fire that caused the Union warehouse to be burned in Maysville
Yeah.
or what was the reason, but
Wow.
that's a sad thing, but I found that out. That's real in history. But that shows how much the money crop was for the year, and that was the main income for the farm.
Wow.
We sold milk and did that kind of thing for income, and they raised the crops to feed the cattle, and we would sell calves, and they would be quite a good income because it was veal,
Uh-huh.
and that's a luxury kind of meat.
Wow.
So I don't know what the last one of the pictures is there. Is that the one that's got the tobacco on it?
Let me see here. This is I promised to pay to the order of Bank of Russellville. So it looks like they're making payments to the bank.
Oh, that was a payment for the farm, evidently.
Yeah. The farm for the farm.
A promissory note. Okay.
Wow. So these are two, yeah. So Union Warehouse.
Yeah,
Is this the tobacco one?
that's one of the tobacco ones. That's when we lived in, was that Ohio or Kentucky?
Byron Emmons. Let's see. Ohio, Ripley.
Well, if it was after 1950, it was Ohio.
Then Ripley.
Ripley, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That was Union.
Wow. So this is a list of, look at that. Oh, a basket. I see that now.
Baskets, yeah.
308 pounds,
Yeah.
326 pounds, 478 pounds, and they just pay you accordingly.
And there would be an auctioneer walking through, and he would look at the different tobacco baskets, because this is a massive thing, bigger than probably a half a block long. The warehouse would be.
Yeah.
Giant place. And he would walk along, and they would look at the tobacco, and it would be called grading it. You know, just like you say, it's a good quality or not.
Sure.
And according to how your tobacco was graded, you got paid extra or less for it and whatever. But he would be doing that. I think I called it yodeling once, and
Yeah.
but it was a special auctioneer kind of language, and they turned around and said, "Tell him what you said," and I said he was yodeling, and they thought that was funny. I was just a young girl,
Yeah.
so they
I
thought
see
that was
here on
cute. Yeah,
the price per 100 pounds column.
yeah,
It's the, let me see if I can point to it, yeah. So right here, the price per 100 pounds, So it looks like he graded it on how good the tobacco looked. This one got 70, 70. This basket got a 66, 66. This one got a 53. So yeah, like you said, it looks like he was going through and rating all the baskets. That's amazing.
My
And
dad
so,
knew how to rotate the crops, and he was considered to be very proficient at his farming skills. That's partly why we were able to maintain and stay on our farm, was because he kind of knew what to do and made it function well.
yeah, so it looks like, man, you made $800 from this,
And that was quite a chunk.
from that run. So that's
So
the equivalent of like 20 grand almost, close to 20 grand. It's a lot.
yeah, I will find a little basket. They have miniature tobacco baskets in Hobby Lobby now,
Uh-huh.
and people don't even know what they are. It's just an absolute cute little thing to decorate with. But it's a thing that they required that we let them keep when they sold the farm. They found a basket down in our barn, and they that was one of the qualifying things. They says we get to keep the basket. The people that did the selling of the farm, they wanted that. They're just valuable.
Huh.
And the basket would be about 4 feet by 4 feet square. And the little miniature ones, I'll bring one and show you one of these times. The little miniature one is just a real great little decorator item.
Cool.
So,
Where'd this thing?
and those were found. You can show that old purse if you want to.
This?
Yeah,
Yeah, this thing's
that was
this is amazing.
considered a little hand purse. It's got a little handle on the back. It was in the trunk.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Quality. And that was just something that they just used for holding documents?
Oh no, that was a woman's purse.
Oh, okay.
And it was just used back in those days as a very enjoyable little carrying thing, you know.
Wow.
But for some reason, Mom had saved that, and so she put that bunch of stuff in there, and
Was that her purse?
it probably was, yeah.
Wow.
That's probably 100 years old. Yeah.
The fact that you bring 100-year-old stuff out here is it's just crazy to me.
Well, it could have been Granny Hall's purse even, you know.
Grandma.
So that's why I'm saying confidently it probably is 100. Look how weather beaten it is.
It's worn. Yeah.
It's been laying there for years in that trunk. So
Yeah, you can tell.
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that metal claw you're holding.
Oh, this? Okay, I'll
Yeah.
show you.
Tell me about
Now let's pretend that I have a lid on this jar.
that. Okay.
And we would always preserve our foods by canning them and boiling them in a hot water bath with a lid that clamped on, or it had a screw top with a rubber band that was making a seal. And to lift them out of the water bath, you just grabbed onto it like this and lifted it out instead of burning your hands with a wet cloth, because
Yeah.
these would be sort of damp, very hot. And you set them out on the counter, and when the lid actually sealed, you could hear it go a little clamp, you know, it would make a little noise, a click. And the ones that were a rubber band around, of course, they didn't make any noise, but you'd make sure it's sealed well and keep watching your vegetable. Mom was very successful at canning because she knew how to do that. But we also, as people would go to the stockyards, they would have a little area where they would sell their wares. And one year my dad brought home a pressure cooker. Well, Mom thought that was so extravagant, and he knew it would be a big help to her. That's a picture of the pressure cooker. It was so,
This one?
yeah. It was so large that I did not bring it back with me, but it was probably this big around. That's about, well, it held, I think it held 12 quart-sized jars. And
Wow.
you put it on the stove, and instead of having to boil green beans for like 2 hours in another kind of kettle, this made pressure come up inside the pressure cooker, and you could can beans within probably 20-25 minutes
Wow.
because the pressure was intense enough that it caused it. So that was the most wonderful thing. My mom was so good at doing that, and loved that pressure cooker until she literally wore it out. But she had a wood stove, which took a lot longer, to heat things up. So that really saved her a lot of time to have that pressure canner.
Yeah.
And that's her original little big 35 cents for that book to know how to get to use the pressure cooker. Yeah.
Yeah, I see there's a
It,
bunch of recipes inside.
yeah, it came with it. But
Wow.
but that was just part of the thing. I don't know how much the thing cost originally, but I remember the day when my dad came home with it, and she looked at that, and then she just kind of learned to love it. Oh, she liked that thing.
Wow.
But that's what this thing is for, is to pick up those hot jars out of the pressure canner.
Wow.
And let's pretend that this is like a gallon-sized jar,
Okay.
and you fill this with nice, fresh well water that you just drew up out of the bucket. And you put this lid on and then turn it over quickly, and it just allows water to come out as the chickens use it up during the day, and it keeps it nice and clean. They can't get in there and scrap around and
Right.
drop dirt, or little animals can't get in there and fall in it and all that. But these are waterers for chickens. But I use this smaller jar just for demonstration, and this is an ancient jar also.
How old do you think that jar is?
I'm guessing probably 60
Wow.
years at least. It's a rare one. You see them in antique stores
It's a
now.
rare design, I can tell.
Yeah, and
Especially it being square.
yeah,
I feel
and
like I don't see square
just
jars.
it is a very unusual pattern. So
Yeah, I like it.
I wanted to share how we watered our chickens.
Oh, I like that. What's that little shot glass thing right there? Yeah.
This little thing is the amount of cream that you'd get for your coffee. It was really rich cream too.
Okay.
So that was always served, and it didn't even have a lid on it. They were just very careful and kept it nice and cool and sanitary, and you got that much cream, and a cup of coffee probably was about 6 ounces at the max, because it was a thick little mug. I tried to find one, I didn't, but it was a thick mug, probably a cream colored thing. It was very heavy, and you didn't really get an awful lot of coffee because it was so small compared to what we have nowadays. But this is what cream was served in,
Wow.
and that's how you got your
At like a
cream.
house or at a restaurant?
A restaurant.
A restaurant.
Yeah. At a house, you just have a little pitcher and serve the cream with it. So,
Wow.
yeah,
I like that.
yeah, that's what that was.
Very cool.
And there was another couple of things I wanted to share that were unusual kinds of things that people don't know about in most of history. But in Kentucky, you could have a mansion and then tiny little humble houses right next to them. And we would pick up students for school on the school bus who lived in one of those nice houses way back off the road. And it wasn't a mansion, but it was just one of the houses that was a part of the property. And they would have wooden steps at the edge of the fence that the child or an adult could walk up on and get over to the other side and walk back down, rather than breaking the fence down. and that's where the child would come out and stand and wait for the school bus because that was the closest to the road,
Huh.
for them to come. But they had many of those. And one of the places that we lived in Kentucky, which was like the one we lived in Maeslick, was like maybe 1 mile, maybe 2 miles from an absolute mansion.
What was that place called? Maeslick?
Maeslick, it's the name of a town.
Oh, okay.
And I went to school there when I was in the third grade.
Wow.
So the man's name was Jim Finch, and we might even look up Jim Finch on Google and find out. But he was a banker. But it was an interesting thing to have little houses all along the road, not really close together, but little farms, and then come upon this thing that was like something out of old Europe with all of the fancy fencing and ornate looking buildings and all that. It was just absolutely enjoyable just to look at. If you went to Lexington as children, we literally our mouths would gape open because we would drive past the famous racehorse farms, and there were miles of beautiful white fence. One farm might have white for their fencing, one might have stone, another one might have their fencing painted black, and it would just be miles, and it would just absolute nothing but a picturesque kind of thing to look at. It was just beautiful. Then you could see the horses out in the grass, and it was just beautiful.
And horse racing was really big back
Oh, it's
then.
really big back there.
Especially in Kentucky.
One of my dad's brothers worked on one of the racehorse farms.
Really?
Yeah, but it wasn't forever, and we didn't get to go see him there. But he did work on one of them. They're
yeah.
famous. Yeah.
Kentucky Derby.
Yes, absolutely.
That makes sense.
Famous.
Wow. And so there was just a lot of racing horse farms.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they're beautiful. If you look in picture books to see what they look like, it's just like that. They were just taken care of so well, and it was just really quite a treat to drive to Lexington and see those. Well, another thing I was going to share, besides the steps that go over the fence so that it wouldn't break down the wiring of the fence, if someone died, we put a wreath on the door. So you'd be like respectful and kind of know that, that something's happened at that household, and it was just a matter of respect.
Really, a wreath?
They put a wreath on the door. Even as the time when we were in Ohio and I was in the fourth grade, I remember my neighbor, her father passed away, and they put a wreath on her door. I was in the fourth grade, so that's one of the last ones that I remember seeing. And as a matter of interest, I found out later that my papa, my mom's dad, worked in a mortuary for a little bit and helped with embalming.
Wow.
He told of one unusual procedure that they did, and it was interesting to know. It's something I don't know that I need to tell the gory details of, but he did work as helping the embalmers. And now we know that the things they use, like the embalming fluid and all that, is something that you have to really be mindful of how hazardous that is to a person who's touching it or whatever. And anyway, that was an interesting little tidbit about my papa,
Yeah, interesting.
to know that he was working as an embalmer, helping him. So, and the other thing, when a person died, they many times, in fact most times, would bring the body back to the house and decorate a room with flowers and all that stuff, and sat up with the corpse all night. And I remember many, many times going to visit, and it would be a person in the room, and we'd be paying our respects. And then they would have the service at the church a different day, but they would stay up and take turns sleeping and going off. And then after a while,
Wait. So like they put the person in the bed
uh,
and then
no, they were in the casket. And I'm going to tell you another interesting
at the
tidbit.
house.
Yes, at the
Okay, so
house.
they bring the casket in the room,
Mm-hmm.
set it up,
Yeah.
make it really nice. Okay.
And then the family would just take turns, and they're going back and resting. And
What do you mean by that? Like spending the night in there, or
they didn't stay in the room with the corpse, but one of them would sit up with it. Yeah, I don't know. It
like
was
all
just the
night?
custom. All night long,
All night.
all night.
Wow.
And they would take turns resting, and then
Kind of just
get up the next morning.
reflecting with them.
Yeah. I don't know if that was one night that they did that or how it worked, but I know that that was a custom. And I remember my Aunt Annie, Uncle Sam Pfizer, the one who we bought the farm from.
Yeah.
When she died, we went to their house, and they were sitting up all night. And it was just the process of how they were being respectful and
And so people
doing that.
would visit. Would friends and family visit the house?
Oh, all kinds of neighbors and family. People were very connected. That was another thing I've got on my notes to remember. I do not remember anything ever keeping us from being able to go to church. I do not remember being snowbound, and I'm sure there were times we were, because it wasn't that well known how to grade the roads and back into the farm. We lived back different lanes, you know. Like the Fred Adams farm, I'm going to guess that was probably 2 miles back off the main road. We went past another house on the way back to get to the farm, you know, where we lived.
And so when you were snowed in, maybe on a Sunday for church, like how would you get out?
We would just stay at the house, and that would be it. We didn't
Okay.
have to get out for anything. We just evidently would miss, but I don't remember. I can't remember being sick, or if we had a cold, if we stayed home. We didn't think about not spreading it. we
Yeah.
we just but I cannot remember missing.
Wow.
I cannot. That's one thing I have to give my mom and dad credit for, being very, very, very faithful to show it was special to them to be there. So, but I was going to tell you about the embalming thing.
Okay.
Before they did the really sophisticated embalming, and they just had the body for like 2 or 3 days, I suppose. But this is real. Supposed to be a real. Mom doesn't lie. They were sitting up with this. This was a fairly young woman, and they were sitting up, and she got up out of the casket. She raised up and asked for a drink of water, because they had not been able to determine that she didn't have a pulse. She had been very, very sick for a while, but she was just in such a low, low state. She was breathing so shallow in her breathing function that she did not.
Wow.
They just thought she was gone. They didn't check her pulse or whatever, or couldn't feel it, or didn't know how to find it. I don't know. But she got up. She raised up and asked for a drink of water. And that's when I think they got to be more determined to have the definite feature of checking and make sure you don't have a pulse or whatever.
Wow.
But this one, it was years ago, but that's what they said happened.
And And so she
that
just got up and she lived?
she lived for a while longer. Yes, yeah,
Wow.
but she had a bad medical condition. They just thought she was gone, and she was
Wow.
just breathing very shallow. And when you do that slowly, I'm sure your temperature even goes down too. So because you're not really terribly warm. But anyway, that was a hair-tailing story my mom
Wow.
told about. That was interesting. Um, and in the farming kind of life, when they did move from one farm to another, it needed to be in like January or February because that's in between the crops. You're
Right.
finishing doing the tobacco and harvesting it and selling it. And so it's logical. You would be ready to move to a different place. And I have some pictures there that show how the tobacco would be taken care of and put into the barn. Before I forget to do that. Now the first picture is a picture of how well Mom kept her little farm, but the tobacco is where it would be cut down and allowed to wilt, and then you could handle it, and then you hang it in the barn. And there's some pictures of people in different steps of the rafters where one would hand it from the wagon or the sled. We used a sled a lot, a big sled,
Uh-huh.
to haul things around, and they used horses with it. And
We'll go over these
now,
pictures.
which picture do you have first?
I will, oh, it's upside down. Hold on. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Let me set this up.
Well, that shows how well Mom took care of her little yard and her farm area, and that's just a good example of how good she was at keeping things neat and trim. And that's at a tobacco barn, and they had long, slender doors that would open for ventilation. You would open those doors and it would let air circulate through to allow the tobacco to dehydrate.
Huh.
And the next one shows, okay, now that one's an interesting one. That shows the tobacco probably a week or two before you're going to cut it. And that's the end of the harvest. But see those little blooms on the top?
Yes.
Those are called suckers, and they would go out and do a thing called sucker the tobacco, and they would break those off, and it would allow the plant to drive a little bit more growth into the leaves themselves, and then it was ready to cut.
Really?
Yes. Now, this is what it looked like when you are ready to harvest. See, those little blooms are all broken off, and you see some tobacco laying on the ground on the right-hand side, and that means that they have cut it, and they put a spear on that tobacco stick, and they spear the core of that plant right down about 6 inches down from the top, and it allows the plant to be spread out over the tobacco stick. And when you get it hanging up in the barn, you spread them out so they have air flowing through, and
Wow.
it won't mold.
Huh.
It would mold if you didn't. And there it is with many sticks of tobacco in the ground. And you would always have to make sure it was a good day to do the cutting, because if it rained on it, Oh, it would have to dry out that much more. But
Right.
you allowed it to be a good day of sunny weather, and it would wilt down so it was pliable and wouldn't break the leaves. It would be like romaine lettuce. It would be crunchy and crisp, you know.
Mm.
But these are a little softer, and they're a little bit fuzzy on one side, a little bit fuzzy on one side of the leaf.
Interesting.
And that shows another picture of the at the you can see why we needed extra people to help. That's a big field, and that's a lot of tobacco, and
Yeah.
that's you have to lift it and put it onto a wagon or a sled. We had a sled. We used the sled a lot. I just remember that with the horses.
Man.
And then they get into that's the tobacco barn. That was a modern day thing of the tobacco barn. See that the way that door slides across there?
Right.
So anyway, you open that up and go in, and then you see the men going way up in the rafters, and if you look in the top right, you'll see some feet. Somebody's way up high. You had to hang it up really high
Oh yeah.
in the barn and then bring it down lower and lower.
The feet are above this guy's head.
Yeah, and it was a little bit of a dangerous job to do that. And those rafters are placed so that they exactly hold the width of a tobacco stick.
Wow.
They just hang those on there. So there's one more. I don't know what the last one was all about. That shows them. See, you see a person way up high on the
Yeah.
rafters on that, where you can see the profile of it. And that was a pretty steamy, hot kind of weather to do that too. It had to be a warm day. So you see the different stages of and there's one of the shows a little door open, and that was all along the sides of the barn to allow air to go through on a day when it was good weather, and you'd close them when it rained.
Wow.
But you allow the tobacco to do a thing called curing. It would cure, and then it got to be all the way dehydrated, and it would start to be like maybe November. They would go out and check the tobacco and make sure it was not too dried out, because it would get brittle and crunchy and break off. But it had to be a certain dehydration for them to say, okay, now it's time that we can take this down and it won't damage the leaves too much. And they take it to a little building called a stripping room, and there's windows all on the north side to allow light to come in, and you could look at the tobacco as you were taking it off of the plant, and you group one kind of leaves together. And believe it or not, there were things at the very tip top of the plant called they were the most valuable, I think. There were the smaller ones, but they were just really, and you group all them together, and then you take, after you've got a big bushy thing of tobacco leaves, you take another leaf and you fold it carefully, and then you wrap it around the top very flat, and then you tuck it in through those leaves, so it'll hold, and then you put it in a press and compact it, and it won't go bad. It's all been dried out well enough, but it won't go bad when you do that. And then that's when you have to take it off to the market pretty soon. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's the whole process of the tobacco growing.
I like that. Wow.
You learn from the tips. Oh, one I know what it was. It's a strange term called trash. Were some of the most valuable. Those little tiny leaves from the top
Yeah.
were some of the most valuable. Not those big fat ones at the bottom even, but they were considered to be the valuable.
Huh. And they were just of
money makers.
a higher grade or something?
Yeah, evidently, maybe because they're new. I don't know. They're new growth at the top of the plant, you know.
That makes sense.
But anyway, that's the tobacco harvest.
Wow.
And it was always in cold weather when we had to do that stripping of it. I didn't ever have to do much of that, but I would come home from school, my brother and I, and they would be out in the stripping room, and they put those hands, after they had them tied, grouped one kind together, they put those hands of tobacco into a press and back on the tobacco stick and compressed it, and it would be about this wide when it was compressed. And then they would lay it down on this basket when they got it to the market.
And that was those baskets we were seeing on that bill.
I've got to find a little miniature tobacco basket, because they kept the one on our farm. When we sold it, they wanted the basket.
So they were going to use it. They wanted to use it.
No, they're valuable now.
Oh.
So they wanted the. It's not easy to find one of those nowadays. So
Wow.
they wanted to keep it. So they did, and you know, it's something I wouldn't fuss about selling the farm over. So we did let them have the baskets. But I can find a miniature one and show it to you.
Yeah. Tell me about, what is this thing?
The which? Oh, that's a potato masher.
Oh, okay.
We would just, we didn't have mixers yet, or I don't think we did. And so that Mom would cook up some potatoes, and that was hers. That was her, and that's not a duplicate from a store. That was Mom's potato masher.
It's in good shape.
Yeah.
I like that.
And she did a good job with it.
What about this thing?
Oh, that is because the iron that you used in those days would be very hot off the old cast iron top of the stove, and you put it onto the ironing board. It would burn the board if you left it sitting still. So you had to put it in that little cradle to protect it from burning the cover on the ironing board.
Wow.
And that's what that was for, just to protect the thing from causing a fire.
All right.
So we got we last talked about me going off to nurses training, and I tried to find that little thing that showed how the needles and syringes were wrapped and brought in from Central Supply, but I haven't found my original one yet, and I have one too.
No, it's okay.
But that's okay. That's all right. And I think I finished Christ Hospital and was going to the Visiting Nurse Association, correct?
Yes.
That's where I left. Okay. So that's an interesting scenario. When I went to the Visiting Nurse Association to work, it was a totally different kind of work from hospital work, but it was so cinchy for someone who had been trained as a nurse to go into that field, that you just did like first aid or whatever type thing that was required. Different patients had different requirements. Many times they were patients who were sent home from the hospital that needed to have a follow-up about how they were progressing, or if they needed a dressing changed, or something like that. And I'll tell you one thing. The place where I worked was a walking district, meant that the nurse could get along without having a car of her own. You could take the bus down and then walk from one place to another within your working day. And you're supposed to get your work done for your list of assignment that day, and get all the things accomplished. That's important to know about a last story that I'll tell you. And so it was in an area that had the government projects there, which means it was very low income folks, and some of the houses around had been changed from being a fine old residence to like 4 families living in it, an apartment style kind of living. So you get a little picture of what it was like.
That's interesting. That they were called the government projects.
Uh-huh.
Because today they're just called the projects.
Yeah.
And like, I never knew why.
Yeah.
Until you just said that.
Yeah.
And that was literally the name for it. It was the government projects.
So you have to realize that the people were very, very poor.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the folks were very poor. And we would go into the office and have our daily work assigned to us and do charting from the day before, whatever. And then all the nurses would go meet at a restaurant, a real everyday little place. And so I just realized now that was probably the noon meal for most of the ones that went around. I don't think I remember taking food with me for anything. We didn't eat big or fancy or anything. It was kind of a gathering time and a little fellowship time, but we'd often meet there. Then we'd go off and do our work. So I had some very interesting people to take care of. I had one little lady who was sweet as she could be. And the things that they would tell me, because she had been probably living as a slave at one time.
Wow.
And yeah, oh yeah. And she had lost her fingers in a mangle iron, which means it's a kind of.
How old was this person?
She was probably in her 50s, 60s.
Wow.
Very sweet. But she was, she had to be. 1863 was when I don't know how old she was. She was up in years. But I just had, and I want to tell you about one time when it was snowy, and the snow is so bright on your eyes. Well, first of all, I have to qualify and explain. We had a bag that was almost like a doctor's bag. We carried newspapers folded up, right with the handles, They were folded up and they just fit just right. And we had towels. We'd open up a newspaper and put it on a counter and then put our bag on the newspaper. That was our sanitation kind of protection. And we had our towels to wash our hands. But it was very, very bright and snowy. And I had gone into this house. And you're supposed to not go into any place if you don't think the patient is home. Most times people would be home because if they were a patient, they don't feel like being up and running around. But that was part of our protection. And the nurse who gave me instructions before I started the job, she was with me for like a week to just take me around and show me the different people who were patients presently.
Yeah.
And that I was going to be seeing. And she explained that one of the nurses prior to her had not made sure that her patient was home, and she walked into a room full of people that were not really who was supposed to be there. And this is, as she told me, it was a real story, and that's for my warning. But she said that she went into the room and it was not the kind of place where she should have been. And she wound up, she was engaged, she wound up giving her engagement ring as a begging to get out of the precarious situation she was in, and went straight back to the office and and left.
Wow.
That just goes to show you that you do have to be careful that your patient is home. But I had gone into this room, and it was very cold weather, and people still had fireplaces. This was in a house, in a residence, not one of the projects where they have like little heaters in the wall or whatever. And so I walked through the house back to the kitchen to put my bag down, and the water was dripping in the kitchen sink, and that was one of the ways they kept the lines from freezing up, was to keep the water kind of flowing. And it was just a kind of a slow flowing little drip, but that's what they were doing. And so anyway, that was interesting. But I went in and got ready to come and check my patient because they told me he was there. And when I walked back into the room I had just walked through, I hadn't even been able to tell because the sun had been so bright, and when I walked in, it's kind of blinding. The room was 3 or 4 people in there. So I was kind of undone by that and thinking, well, that teaches me to be mindful. But I do that when I go out to church sometimes. It's so bright outside, and then you walk into the dimly lit area. So anyway, it was all good. It was not a problem of any kind at all. But I was going to tell you some of the interesting different people I had in that West End, it's called. That's my name of my district. One was named Buster, and he was on a striker frame. And that's because he was paralyzed from some kind of skirmish he had been in. And he often had people from prison visiting him.
Now, what's a striker frame?
I was going to tell you what a striker frame is.
Okay.
It is just about as wide as, I'm going to say maybe 2 feet wide for a body to lay on. And it's on a little platform on each end, the head and the foot. But it's only about that wide, and it has a rotating system where you put a frame. It was somebody's paralyzed. He was paralyzed.
Oh.
And I can't remember if he could use his arms or not, but anyway, that was the situation, that he was on this striker frame. And his wife took care of him, and I always made sure she was there when I'd go in. So you take this frame and you put a frame that's the same size over top of it, and you attached it to the circulating, rotating thing here at the top and at the foot. And you could turn the patient over, and he could change the pressure that was maybe on his front of his body where he had been laying for like a couple of hours. You'd rotate every couple of hours. In the hospital, we had to do that too. We had to make sure that people who were not able to move themselves, we would rotate the pressure system that was on their body. And so he was on this kind of a situation where he had a striker frame, and she would flip him over and then take off that upper part, because it would be a new, and he would be on his back for a while. So anyway, that was one of my interesting people. His name was Buster. He was always good, but there were times when if his wife was not there, you didn't go in because it meant somebody else was sitting with him, so he couldn't be alone. And oftentimes it was people from prison.
Wow.
So and that nurse that gave me instructions did a good job because it always made me wise to know what to do.
Yeah.
And there was another woman whose name was Otelia. I can't think of her last name, but she was absolutely one of the nicest people. She had been injured in a fight, like with guns, and it paralyzed her, so she was in a wheelchair, and we just went in to check with her every so many days because she did okay by herself, but she was just an absolute gem of a person to deal with. She was just wonderful. And one of the things that people there could not afford was like an ambulance ride if they had like an emergency. They didn't have insurances and things like that. And they would ask a mortuary to do the service of driving them with the promise that they would have their funeral after everything was.
Really?
Yeah. And there's another woman that I'm going to tell you about that absolutely one of the most memorable things I can ever say. She was someone I was supposed to go check for the circulation of her lower extremities. There was something that she had a diagnosis for that they knew that we had to check about the circulation. And this is what happened. Now, I tell you, I can still remember walking in. She was in bed, and mind you, these are absolute shambles of houses. This was a house. It wasn't in the projects. It was one of those old houses, and I walked, and the first time she was able to yell and tell me to come in. It was all right. So I did, and I checked her pulse in her lower extremities, like her ankles and so forth. And I could tell it was serious, and I was scheduled to go back and see her another time, a couple days later, maybe 3 days. And when I did, I knew where to go, and I knew where her bed was. And this, by the way, was the only thing in the room. She only just had a bed. She didn't have a dresser or any other kind of furniture, like a big bunch of junk like I've got. Anyway, I went in to check her, and this is the thing that I'll tell you. She had not only had occlusion, means all the circulation had been cut off. There were absolutely maggots, and they made a little sound. It was like they would go in and out of the tissue because her tissues had died, on her leg.
Wow.
And I could literally hear a little clicking because of the vacuum it would cause when they would go in, and it was just, and it was one of the most unusual. And I've been around a lot of unusual things, but this really got to me. It just literally gave me chills, and I didn't react. I didn't let her know I was nervous, but I told her that I needed to take care of some things for her. These people do not have phones. They do not have, these folks don't. And we had phones in our office and all that, but these are humble, poor folks. And I had to go back to the office or go to a place where I could get to a phone and work out a situation for her to be transported. That was one thing, to find out someone who would do a free transportation. And it took me a little while, but I got her to the hospital. And then from the office, we had phones, of course, and I kept calling the general hospital where she was taken to find out when her amputation was going to be happening. And it didn't even happen in the next couple of days. I was just absolutely, and her leg was hurting so bad the day I went in the second time and saw her. Her leg hurt so bad. She said, oh, nurse, she was telling me. So anyway, I had to arrange for one of the people that would do a free transportation just to get her to. That was part of our job, was to figure things like that out. So anyway, that was, and I didn't get to see her afterwards. I don't know where she went or any of that, but it was quite a
Wow.
piece of history.
Man,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
that was one of the memorable ones too. And we,
Did you do the cleaning of the wound while you were there?
at the time, there was nothing to do. The second time, no, it was just that we were checking. It wasn't like she'd had a surgery. It was like her circulation had just been stopped by something inside her blood vessels or whatever. And all I know is that the tissue died, and it had time to. It had to be a few days because for that to set up, with. But there had to be an open wound of some kind for that kind of bacteria to get started. It was.
Wow.
It had to probably be a week before I saw her after that. Anyway, that was one of the most memorable ones. And then I was still working there when I'm going to tell you about this last patient. That I asked your permission before, whether that was okay. This was a notorious area of town for crime. And in general, the people were very grateful to have a nurse in the area, and they kind of watched out for you. So I wore a uniform. We had a uniform. It's called the Visiting Nurse Association. But mind you, John Street was notorious. John Street had bars and criminal activity all the time. And it was separate from these little houses, the multiple houses that people, or apartment kind of complexes that people lived in. So if you can picture a place where people used guns, and one of my patients that I told you that was in the wheelchair had been shot and paralyzed forever. That's just an example of the kind of area this was, and I don't know how come. I love those people a lot, though. I did. I learned to love them a lot. And I just found it to be fascinating. I just really liked it. Well, John Street, dark, dirty. Policemen walk in pairs only.
Wow.
And so I had this one patient I was supposed to go see and check from some kind of surgery he had had. It had to do with his kidneys or his bladder or something. And it was on John Street. When I found the address, it was right next door to a bar. You had to go along the edge of the bar to go up the steps to see where he lived. And walked up the stairs, very narrow, dim little light bulb hanging down from the top of the hallway, go up the stairs, and then turn right and go another probably 12 feet to get to the opening of where their apartment was. And it was right over top of the bar, mind you. So I went there, and they opened the door, but they did not let me come in to see the patient. And we're supposed to get our work done the day it's ordered, because it was paid for by, I don't know who paid for it, because this was not a government project, but it was just something that you're supposed to get your work done, because it counted as a cost that you said I went to this house. So the room was filled with people, probably 5 or 6 people. And the fact that they didn't let me in, I didn't push my way, because you go up the hallway, back, and then that entered where the room was filled with people, and they were around like a table, kind of milling around, and the patient was somewhere else. Further out, it would be over top of the bar, that's where the apartment was. So anyway, they just did not allow me to see the patient. So I had to go back and report that at the office. I didn't get my work done, and that cost them something, because it was like a ticketed item. But when I say I went to this address, and that was a visit.
Right.
Well, they told me I still needed to go back the next day. So I thought, well, with a little fear and trembling, I did. I went back and walked up the hallway and knocked on the door. And I can't remember if one other individual was there or whether it was a patient himself who allowed me to come in. And you do preliminary things like just make sure, their blood pressure is good or whatever, and have the blood pressure cuff and things like that. And then you're supposed to check whatever the order was for, like check a wound for being sanitary and healing well and so forth. And he had been probably at Cincinnati General Hospital. That's where most of the folks went. So anyway, I go talk about this narrow hallway and a few steps in, and I go through the room where the table is, where all the people had been the previous day. And then we go out front, and you could look out the window, and that was overlooking John Street, the famous scary spot. Well, I checked all of his vital signs, and I was ready to check his wound. And the reason I was there, to see that he was healing well, whatever. And he was a simple little man. And he, out of the corner of my vision, I could tell he had dropped his trousers. And he says, "Ain't they nice?" And I very quickly realized he still had clothes on, but it was a moment of remembering what the previous nurse had shared with me about being safe and all that. And so I realized that he was just standing there, and he had nice new underwear that they had gotten him. And he wanted to be pleased that he was dressed properly and upscale, so to speak. But for a moment, I thought to myself, that was a little
Right.
unusual.
Yeah.
And so I very quickly realized, he was okay, just absolutely a sweet little man.
Yeah.
And that's all it was. But for a moment of mindful being startled, I just very carefully went ahead and did everything I was supposed to, and checked his wound,
Wow.
and then and it's, oh, that's nice, and he was so proud he had clean, nice underwear.
Yeah, that's funny.
And so this is the part I was going to share. When I got finished after that and put all my stuff back together, and everything was absolutely fine, he was just sort of precious. I went down that narrow, dark hallway, and I went out onto John Street, and there were two policemen walking. Only in pairs would they walk on John Street. And I almost laughed hysterically. I was so absolutely relieved that everything was good
Yeah.
and that it had been so harmless. And I don't even remember if I even told Rod about that.
Really?
I really don't know that I ever shared that little strange momentary mindful thing
Yeah.
that happened, that I don't remember that. Or he probably would have said, hey, I don't think I want you working down there
Yeah.
anymore.
I don't think I like that.
Cause we had started dating, and that will be the next phase of my explanation. But that story was one that I remember now, and I think about, and I think, my goodness, it was
Wow.
just priceless. And and good Lord was taking care of me all that time,
Yeah.
because I went into houses that were dark and spooky, and I went into the projects, which they were pretty neat and clean, and honestly, but the people kind of watched out for me.
Hmm.
And so it was all good,
Yeah.
but that story was just precious to me. Afterwards I thought about it, and I thought it was just one of those momentary things in life.
Yeah.
And and I talked about the thing at the hospital, the the chest tubes.
Oh, you explain that.
I will explain that. We had some of the most sophisticated, advanced surgeries at our hospital that ever happened in anywhere. I mean, it was just really advanced. But one of the things that we did not have was a sophisticated equipment they have nowadays for when a person has chest surgery. And when you have a chest surgery, you have to have drainage tubes that help to get rid of a great excess of fluid that happens when you have a area of surgery like that. And the tubes were were stitched to the individual, and I've been told later that taking those tubes out is the experience of a lifetime. But the point is, the tubes were submerged at one end into a fluid that was clean and sterile down at the base of the floor, but the bottles were giant. They were like gallon-sized bottles, and it was taped around the neck of the bottle so that it was a vacuum, as good a vacuum seal as you could do in those days. But if you kicked a bottle over, there were two or three of these bottles, and they were clumsy to work around the base of a bed.
Yeah.
And we didn't have them every day either. It was a rare thing. So when you did, you were very mindful. But the point is that if you tipped a bottle over and the tube came out of that fluid that was in the bottle on the floor, it created the vacuum that protected from the thing I'll share with you that would happen. The lung would collapse if you allowed air to go back in.
Wow.
It would. So we had to be careful with that.
Oh my goodness.
And chest bottles were not something enjoyable to have to worry with and take care of a patient.
Frequently?
No, it's just that they explained to us what would happen, and so we had the fear of prevention.
Yeah, I don't want to kick it over.
They did not want to kick those over, and you had to do a bath for every person. Got a bath every day. It was just the way it was.
Hmm.
And that was, and you had to turn them over, and sometimes you had to have help, with some of the different kinds of positions people were in. But that was one of those that I
Wow.
had to.
Did you enjoy your time as a travel nurse?
I loved it. It was called visiting nurse, and
Oh, yeah,
I
I'm
had a
sorry, visiting
car.
nurse.
I had a car, and I drove down and would park as close to as I needed to. On days when we had a ball game for the Red Legs, Crosley Field was located in my area.
Wow. The Red Legs are now the Red Sox, right?
No,
No,
Red
no.
Legs, they're still Red Legs, as far as
Cincinnati,
I know. Cincinnati Reds.
Cincinnati Reds. Now
Yeah.
they're just the Reds.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So back then they were the Red Legs.
Yeah, because they wore red socks, I
Oh, that's
reckon.
funny.
And the doctor was Dr. Ballou, who took care of all the team, the
Wow.
Reds. Balleu. And they would come to our hospital when anything was ever wrong
Wow.
and they needed medical treatment of any kind. So we had some very interesting, good patients. So anyway, it
What
was
kind of
it was
car
a,
did you drive back then?
I had a white Chevy. It
Wow.
was it was a And that's an interesting thing. I didn't even know how to drive, and I bought that car and left it at the farm for like months. And somehow or other, I can't remember if it was Rod that told me I should take that car down and use it. And I just started to drive then.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had a white Chevy. Yeah.
And you went and bought it at the dealership?
No, we had a person out in Decatur who just went out and sought it for me. He had a filling station,
Huh.
and he knew how to get around and do things like that. So he just bought it, and I just paid for it and left it sitting at the farm. And then finally I started to drive it, and then it was all good. But
where does your visiting nurse career rank in your list of favorite jobs?
I tell you, I was pretty naive, and I loved it. I did.
You enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed the people. People are fascinating to me, and I just appreciated them. If anybody could accept all the different people, I could, because I had been in a kind of a humble growing up situation, and I just appreciated all the people, and because I said never nothing ever happened to me, I was just so I was just happy there. I just loved it.
Yeah.
I would have stayed there for a long time, but we moved, and then I had Regina, and I didn't work when she was born,
Hmm.
so I just had a good existence with that.
I
And
like
we
that.
we used to teach new young mothers how to give baths to babies. Mothers that were just by themselves, kind of thing, and we did all kinds of training and teaching and how to give shots and all kinds of stuff like that. But I just love those people. They just were fascinating to me. Each one was a unique character.
Yeah.
So, and I got along well with every single one of them. So it was all good.
Very nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Well,
You
you
can
want to
ask
do
me
some
some of the, yeah, give me
do
some
some of these
questions.
cards? Okay, let's do. Okay, how did your family spend time together when you were young?
Actually, we didn't we didn't have to do anything fantastic. We would either be going to visit one of the family relatives. We'd be in the car, and as I said, we'd go to see Francis and Floyd, or We'd go to see my grandmother, my dad's mom, up in Bethel.
Mm-hmm.
Drive through a covered bridge to get there, and we'd visit and get a loaf of bread and some bologna and have a sandwich on the way. Nothing to drink. It was just interesting.
Yeah.
I suppose there were bottles of pop. Oh, there were, I'm sure. Yeah, I can remember now. But we just didn't need that. We were just happy. We'd just sit in the car. My brother and I got along really well. We did not fuss or anything. And my mom would just put two pieces of bread together with our little sandwich. We were so happy just because, we're getting a little bit hungry.
Yeah.
And we'd go visit with them. But at home, we didn't have a television until probably my last 3 years at home. I can't remember when we got our first TV, but we didn't sit around and watch a lot of TV. We'd watch maybe a cowboy movie. And, but my brother and I were pretty scheduled at doing our homework. And we'd go in and do our homework. So we didn't really do an awfully lot, except sometimes we'd watch a little something on TV together. But it was either family time, doing work outside. We'd like I said, we'd go and help my dad with the setting of the tobacco, but they didn't want us to be around the cows. They were so careful. Maybe because of that bone problem my brother had, they didn't want a chance an injury, but we never did have to do the milking. We never did. We'd do other things, and I'd help my mom with the canning and breaking beans and doing the corn husking and all that.
Yeah.
But we just would just kind of sit around and be happy, honestly.
Yeah.
And I tell you, one thing I recall when we were on the farm, it was cold. We had the stove in one room, and you saw the size of our little 4 rooms at the bottom
Yeah.
of the house, and we would literally close off all the other rooms. And the kitchen, after we did the dishes, we didn't keep the stove running. That would be wasteful. And so it would be so cold that it would start to cool down. And by the time you got done washing the dishes for just 3 or 4 people, the water was getting cold in the dishpan. It was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So you just go in and sit down and be warm for a little while, and then you go to bed.
Yeah.
And it was time, but I didn't. And it was too chilly to even sit in the kitchen and do my homework. Yeah.
Wow. Pretty cold.
Yeah, it was cold. I mean, it got really biting cold back there.
Next question.
Oh, okay.
Did your relationship with your family change in your teenage years? I guess that's when you would have started 13, 14, so that's the start of high school. Did it
You
change
know,
a lot?
I'm going to say it just kind of grew, and we became a different phase of our life, but we knew how to have respect for our mom and dad. And, you get a little bit more smarty pants as far as you think you know a few more things and
Yeah.
all that, but was never allowed to be backtalk or anything like that. And we never wanted to show it. We just kind of grew up, and it changed a little bit, but not drastically.
I see.
We always loved our mom and dad, But you know, there's that thing where you become a teenager and you think you've got a little bit of education. You know your dad didn't have all that or whatever, and you just kind of keep it to yourself, but you are still respectful. And my dad had so many good qualities that, and but they didn't allow back talk. We didn't really have to go through that bad phase of that anything like that because we just weren't allowed and we knew better.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So anyway, it changed in some ways.
Yeah.
You just quietly keep it to yourself, you know.
Hmm. Who did you spend the most time with when you were a kid?
My mom.
Your mom.
Mhm.
And what would you guys do together? Lots of things around the
We
house.
well, you know, I told you about my grandpa and my brother could go fishing. And I did not understand in those days the need to be protected like mom did. And she didn't scare us to death with it either. She just very quietly and calmly would explain, you know, no, you don't go with them to the creek. And she didn't put the fear of being petrified about strangers coming along and doing anything. She just protected me. And so consequently, I was just with her all the time.
I see.
We did the thing with the corn where I told you we bagged up the ears of corn and took them to the mill
Yeah.
because, oh, and one of those checks that you saw there was for a payment towards some kind of a mill. So that meant that on the farm there was something,
See if I can find it here.
um, something about a mill. Anyway, we just did everything together. We'd go out and do the chickens. We'd go to the store and
$555, which was the entire interest in the tractor, the truck, the hammer mill,
hammer mill. That was it.
the hammer mill.
I'm thinking a hammer mill is like one. It's a thing that's built and you just don't move it when you leave the farm.
I see.
So that's what we had back there.
And
Yeah.
the binder.
Binder. Okay, I got to tell you a story. I don't know if this is out of school or not.
Okay.
Because there's one of those checks that my dad had taken care of. Um, the binder.
Uh-huh.
And my mother's brother, who lived in Indiana, and I won't say any names, but he borrowed that piece of equipment.
The binder.
I think that was the one
Okay.
because the reason I'm thinking that had to be it because if my dad paid for it, my grandpa loaned it. Uncle Bob came one year. Oh, I've forgotten said his name, and they wanted to get it back because my dad needed it. This is when we lived in Ohio, and he says, "Pap gave me that." And it wasn't his to give.
Ah.
So it caused a kind of a discord in the family for many years. And finally, mom and dad make up with people, but that was the reason because my dad knew he had paid for it.
So your dad was still living when he
Oh,
said
yeah.
that. And so
Hmm.
did your dad confront him and say like, I didn't give it to you?
Oh, the other person stormed out and drove away, and we didn't see him for years.
Wow.
So that was the story behind that. And so my mom and dad were the forgiving ones and went out there and visited them. And
Wow.
so that was the reason. And when I saw that check for the baler, I
Yeah.
think that's what it was, or it was a combine, one of the two. But anyway, it caused a sad thing to happen. Oh, there was another thing I was going to tell. When we still lived at home. Oh, this is funny. There was a wagon wheel at the end of our field where the roads joined together and in front of a neighbor's house. And the wagon wheel had the mailboxes on it. And as you can imagine, a wagon wheel, if it's on a spindle, turns, and that's the way the mailman would just turn the boxes and um and I hope this never gets back to family back there.
Oh, that's okay.
But we had a relative, distant relative, who had died, and they had read a will, and there was just a tiny little bit of financial thing that was supposed to come to my mom. So she knew about it, and she knew the lawyer's name and all that, and communicated with him. They'd said that it had been sent. So she said she hadn't received it. And we got to watching that little mail wheel, the wagon wheel. And we could take our little binoculars and look down there, and we watched the neighbor check all the mailboxes.
Really?
I kid you not.
Wow.
And you have to get along with these folks.
Right.
So we had to resolve that without ever confronting that individual, to realize that they had taken the mail out of curiosity and had taken our. We watched them take stuff out of the boxes. Yeah, we could see it.
It's a federal crime.
Yep,
Man.
definitely was. But it got to be serious because we were looking for that one particular thing. We would have known that we're missing other stuff.
What were you looking for?
It was something coming from Lexington, from like a lawyer from
Oh, wow.
from this estate. So anyway, that got resolved some way, but we did watch that, and we knew it was an evident thing, and we didn't know how to deal with business because that was real, and we witnessed it.
Yeah.
And as kids, it was kind of funny, but we witnessed,
Wow.
that it really did happen. So that was another little tidbit I had on here
That's
to
funny.
share. That was real.
Oh my goodness.
Hmm.
Let's see here. Um, hmm. What was it like when you found out you were going to have a baby?
Well, I had never really been around a lot of little children. We didn't get to see our relatives that often. They were usually kind of scary. Uh, it took a while to make up to family when you don't see someone, and these children didn't get around a lot. So when I found out, I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is wonderful," but I didn't know how to take care of little kids. I thought, I was pretty excited though. I was
Yeah.
pretty excited, yeah.
It sort of jumps the gun a little bit because I know that's part of your story,
Yeah,
but yeah, just definitely interesting.
yeah.
Um, let's see. We'll save this one. We'll do these. Um, who is the wisest person you've ever known, and what have you learned from them?
You know, I have to tell you honestly, it has to be Rod and my mother. They both knew how to be discreet, and Mom was smart as a whip too. But she never lorded it over my dad, never. And she had quite a bit of good, good smarts about her. And yet, I have to tell you, I tell you that Rod was, I was amazed a lot about how much he knew and how careful he was with his slow to anger. He never really was bad with me ever. And to find out how smart he was, I'll have to tell you one thing. I told the story already, I think, about when he worked at the bank and how he had learned to do all that extra stuff when he went back, and his Uncle Eddie kind of got him started when he worked with those computer things in the beginning of the computer world. But you know, when he went to the bank, he was faithful enough that they were going to retain him, one of only a few, when they were changing from this antique way of doing things to become like, I think it was NCR. Mike was the one that remembered that that's what Rod had said.
Yeah, and for
And
those wondering, NCRs, I think they're still around today,
yeah,
and they design payment processing machines like ATMs for major banks. They
yeah,
cash registers, payment processing systems at like grocery stores. Next time you swipe your card or you're at an ATM or something, it'll probably say NCR somewhere.
okay,
So
yeah.
they're very prominent today.
Well, I think that was the one, and they offered to keep him as one of only three people when they were phasing out the old bank system
Wow.
and send him off to school and train him because he'd shown to be faithful and knew what he was doing. And even still, I mean, he knew how to do programs that I do not know how to do still. I don't even know how to, I just don't quite get all that. And he just kind of kept up with it. So, and you're a good one on that computer world. Um, I just have to say that I have appreciated what he had to say. And I want to tell you another thing. I found out that he had enough training in psychology that he could have done the mentoring under a person. He had the hours accomplished, and he could have charged for his. So people who had him come in and help them with their Christian understanding at the church didn't know what a privilege they had that he was as tolerant as he was, and he had the deep understanding of how to deal with people, and guide them in a good way. So I just have to say I was so fortunate to have him. It was just absolutely,
We were all fortunate.
yeah,
Yeah.
he was very special. And then I told you about my mom, how she had that sixth grade education and then went ahead and became an LVN, just studying three subjects
It's amazing.
because she just, and she was, I think she was 46 when she started to work there at the hospital,
Wow.
and just was faithful to do those little classes they asked her to do until, and I've got the papers in there that, and the man who was and I can show them when we have our podcast that would require that. Um, the man who was the head of the hospital actually sent a gift of finances of some kind when she died with the nicest letter. And just really was commendable.
Wow.
So those two people stand out a lot to me.
I like that.
I was very blessed.
We'll do one more, okay?
Okay.
What have you changed your mind about over the years?
Oh, what not to worry about. And if you have a general understanding that something is important, but if you worry about it, it doesn't really benefit anything. I pray about it, but I don't let myself be mindful and just um, hang around in worry and grief. And I try to make it something more beneficial. If there's something positive I can do toward the thing I'm concerned about, but I just try to remember to not be overly burdened, because this too will pass. It will pass, whatever it is. So I think that's one thing I have learned. You do everything positive that you can toward helping a situation,
Yeah,
and then you let it go.
you have to.
Yeah, you have to.
Good words of wisdom. I think we'll end it there.
Okay.
Okay.
And I thank you again for all your. I was so honored when you did Grandpa's thing, and I didn't think about mine being important, but I appreciate that you do it.
Both of equal importance, and it's my honor. I
Thank
love you.
you.
Love you, Grandma.
I love you more.